Earlier in the week, I watched with interest that you did a comparative study of South Africa's economic situation versus that of our northern neighbor, Zimbabwe. What did you find?
Well, yes, good morning to you, Luthuli. It wasn't only an economic comparison, but also a political comparison. Because let's face it, many South Africans, especially the pessimistic ones, their common refrain is that South Africa is headed the same way as Zimbabwe. And while our northern neighbor has had its own turmoils to deal with over the past 3 decades since independence, there's various parallels that can be drawn with the journey that South Africa is following, but not in the overwhelming majority. If you compare the two countries, the two nations, very different stories. The analysts that I spoke to, economists, and also, of course, two Zimbabweans that live in South Africa, tell a tale of South Africa perhaps looking at the Zimbabwean script but not following it to a T. Let's hear what they had to say. Precious Moyo arrived in South Africa 10 years ago, escaping Zimbabwe's financial implosion under Robert Mugabe. After initially working for several years, Moyo has fallen on hard times.
The economy, everything was bad, but I was just trying to move for greener pastures coming down here. We do not have jobs, same as the situation in our country.
She believes the problems South Africa is facing are all too familiar.
It's getting more like Zimbabwe because from the look of it, everything, the groceries, you can see, even if you see the groceries, they're going up every now and then, and the fuel prices, they're going up. Same situation as in Zim.
Moyo argues that many Zimbabweans in her community are considering their options for the future. It's a different tale for Sher Kamunga. The communications consultant has made a life for him and his family since leaving Harare for Johannesburg over 15 years ago.
In every society, you always have a section of people who are just pessimistic, and it to be expected. And obviously, people are afraid and concerned because Zimbabwe is just next door.
He's adamant that South Africa will not go the way of its northern neighbor.
You've got a strong judiciary, you've got strong Chapter 9 institutions, you've got strong civic society, you've got a very strong and independent media, and the general democratic fabric of the country is much diverse and much stronger than what we have in Zimbabwe. So we are comparing, like I say, apples and oranges.
Financial analysts concur, saying comparisons are too simplistic, as the realities on the ground are vastly different in each country.
Symptoms may be similar. Two people can have the same symptom, they have headaches, but the causes of the headaches and the outcome of cure treatment is going to be very different.
But while the cause and effects of years of economic decline could be different, the potential suffering in both countries will not be dissimilar.
The majority of South Africans are very conscious of the fact that if we make wrong decisions, we will go along the line, along the very, very downhill, that will take generations to get out of, and a good example is Zimbabwe.
So, South Africa won't be a carbon copy of Zimbabwe, but the country must get its house in order. Nickolaus Bauer, Johannesburg.
So, Nick, how are South African politicians ensuring that South Africa does not go the way of Zimbabwe? We know that our president is a very busy man trying to sort out state institutions that have really come under pressure as a result of state capture.
Well, indeed, Luthuli, but I mean, that's just one aspect of the political machinations that are playing itself out within the ANC and, of course, within the South African socio-economic and political situation that we're faced with at this point in time. And you may ask what Cyril Ramaphosa is doing to ensure that we don't go down the same route as Zimbabwe, but I'd like to draw your attention to what the judiciary has done. If you speak to a number of analysts, they regard that South Africa won't go the way of Zimbabwe simply due to the fact that when we are faced with a judicial fork in the road, as it were, and I recall, cast your minds back to Robert Mugabe losing the constitutional amendment of, if memory serves correct, in Zimbabwe of 2000. and as such, constitutional court ruling against him in years that followed. Essentially, it resulted in constitutional court judges that weren't seen as amenable to the political establishment in Zimbabwe being replaced and hounded out of office. When there was an unpalatable ruling from the Constitutional Court in South African society, and yes, I am referring to that Constitutional Court judgment when President Jacob Zuma was found to have failed to uphold and protect and respect the Constitution, it was a moment where the ANC swallowed its pride and Jacob Zuma offered a mealy-mouthed, yet somewhat an apology, and accepted the judgment. And South Africa proceeded along the road of constitutionalism. So when we are comparing Zimbabwe and South Africa, let's keep a few realities in mind. As was mentioned by the economist Iraj Abedian in that package that I put together, South Africa not only has a very robust judiciary that remains independent, but you and I work for a fourth estate media that is extremely pugnacious and will stop at nothing seemingly to get to the truth, and as such keeping our politicians on our toes. And with that freedom of speech, we could also argue that South Africa is vastly different to Zimbabwe. But I suppose the question on everybody's lips, Koli, is how South Africa is approaching the land question. Zimbabwe, of course, it could be argued, approaching the land question in many ways unproductively. Some may argue productively if you look a couple of decades down the line. But South Africa now faced with its own very critical land reform proposals and agenda at the front of mind of all South Africans at this point in time. And we wait with bated breath to see how the ANC is going to handle this, and also how other political parties are going to handle this as we head towards the general election in 2019.